anxious or still joining us, we will, they'll be able to just join when they did. So we left with one lingering question from Jay. So we'll start the session with that and then open things up to you, Ron, for your presentation this afternoon. So Jay.
Thank you.
Alan, can you unmute Jay?
Thanks, Alan. Ron, thank you for taking my question and welcome to the United Church of Canada. And by the way, I've got a preaching gig for you tomorrow morning if you're available. But before that, a two-part question. I heard you right. I heard you talking about the work of strengthening the bonds that are needed to hold a community together for the purpose of collective learning.
Yes.
I would like to know from you specifically in your context, in the American context, which is, you know, splashed across all of our television networks too. I'm asking about your context because I think Canadians can learn from that. Where do you see that work of strengthening those bonds happening in the public life right now? It might be happening through schools or churches or, you know, mosques or whatever, but where do you see that?
Wow.
And second of all,
yeah.
For those of us trying to exercise that kind of work or leadership, could you speak specifically to the importance and the role of self-awareness and self-care in that? Thank you for taking my questions.
Yeah.
While you're thinking about that, I know the later part of your presentation is covering that second question, so you can feel free to leave that until later.
Your second question has two parts, self-awareness and self-care. Let me talk a little bit about self-care later. So let's park that for right now. And let's see if I can respond to the first and 1.5 questions then. I wished I could say that my country was splashing anything more than, you know, drops of burning oil all over your country and the rest of the world, and that we were a fount of good examples for civic engagement, civic responsibility, or even civic behavior, civility. I think, if anything, I think what much is to be learned from what's happened in the United States in the ways that we've neglected strengthening the bonds to hold people together across their differences, and that the polarizations have increased, and the schisms and cavernous divides between us have only gotten deeper, and to the point of really dangerous and deep pathology and risk to democracy itself. So, because democracy isn't just about election systems and voting; it's about shared and collective responsibility for the community, and a shared of being in it together. And without that civil society, we're really in, you know, very quickly in trouble. And we're seeing that in America. Now, the dynamics by which we dug ourselves into this ditch, or drove ourselves into this ditch, dug ourselves into this hole, are very important and interesting to analyze. And that's probably not going to be terribly useful to you, but there is a natural process once a divide begins to open, where it opens increasingly wider. There's a process of reinforcing the divides that are part of which is a dilemma in politics, because you win votes in politics by figuring out who are the most passionate people that you can collect on your side of the divide and speaking to them. So over generations, you get a reinforcement. By generations, I mean each election cycle, every 2 to 4 years, you get a reinforcement of the divide as each party begins to play to its core constituency more and more, and pulls it farther apart. And in a way, one way to describe it is you get a dumbing down of democracy as people throw at their constituencies increasingly simplistic formulations for how complex problems are supposed to be addressed and solved. And because there's a hunger for certainty, and because the adaptive work requires to some degree departing from old ways of life. Maybe it's only 5%, but it's still a departure and hard for people and frightening. You get this increasing polarization. So I think, and I think certainly historically you would see that, I'm sure, if you began to analyze the splitting of church communities and then the increasing entrenchment and cementing in place that polarization, that division. And then maybe after a few generations, people begin to say, hey, wait a second, we actually have a lot in common. Let's reconnect. So that's a beautiful thing when you see the reconnection. And my guess is, I don't know too much about the United Church of Canada, but if it's united, somehow at one point it was not united. So somebody made the effort of casting ropes across each other's walls and saying, hey, let's climb across those walls and realize that we have so much more in common than we have dividing us. I mean, if we have 99% of our DNA is the same as a chimpanzee, then my God, 2 Christian communities have a hell of a lot in common. In fact, Jews and Christians have a lot in common, and even Jews and Hindus or Buddhists have a lot in common, in the sense that, everybody's trying to create a more loving community and help people manage their anger and their outrage and their selfishness. There isn't a religious community anywhere around the world that is, at least, in any of the major religious communities, that is extolling the virtue of supreme self-centeredness and making that the God. I mean, everybody's trying hard to figure out how to do better. So, but of course we do have differences, and figuring out a way to make the differences enriching rather than dividing is a real task. Now, one of the images that I take from nature is that innovation in nature is a product of differences. The original form of reproduction in nature was replication and then division. And that form of reproduction was the original form of reproduction, and it still is the major form of reproduction for those cells that want to become exactly identical to the previous generation. So most of the cells in our body at one point or another replicate. All the cells in our intestines replicate every 2 days. And the replications, the DNA replicates itself, and then the cell divides and becomes 2 identical cells, just as its predecessor, So, and so does our skin when we cut ourselves, and it repairs. So, and in most ancient times, that was the only way you had reproduction. And that is also the way that bacteria, many single-celled organisms, including the trillions of them that inhabit us in our digestive tract, that is how they divide. They duplicate and they replicate in their DNA, duplicating themselves, and then they divide. Now, that works great I mean, a bacteria can duplicate itself in 20 minutes if it has enough food. So why would you ever get in evolution this incredibly cockamamie, from a biological and physics and chemistry point of view, unbelievably complex phenomenon called sexual reproduction? And it took about 300 to 400 million years since the beginning of the Earth for the creation of the first cell, which is pretty complicated, that first cell. Nobody has yet figured out how you get to the first cell. Evolutionary theory works great once you get to the first cell, but nobody's figured out has a really well worked out scientific theory for how you get to the first cell. So you get to the first cell after about 300 or 400 million years. Those of us with a theological orientation consider that God's original laboratory. That's how long it took God to figure out how to get to that first cell. Once you get to that first cell and you've come up with an evolutionary mechanism, the cell begins to kind of do its own thing and figure out how to innovate on its own. And it does. It innovates quite a lot as bacteria. However, not nearly as rapidly as when you bring together differences. And that's the essence of sexual reproduction. You're bringing together differences. Male and female with different chromosomes, different DNA, 99.9% the same, but not 100% the same. And when you bring together those differences, a lot of funny things happen. You get a much higher mutation rate, a lot of recombination, a lot of different kind of combining and recombining, mixing. And that process, once you get to sexual reproduction, biology has this engine for innovation. And we see this explosion of life forms that begins to take place, including all the multicellular organisms and nearly all the life forms that we can see with the naked eye are a product of sexual reproduction, including trees and plants. So it's the bringing together the differences. Now, it was complicated. If it took 300 million years for the first cell, it took another 2 billion years. 2 billion years of evolutionary time to evolve sexual reproduction. So but that's the benefit of it. Because it's bringing together differences, you get much more innovation. Now, the way I like to think about that in human terms is people don't learn by staring in the mirror. People learn by engaging a different point of view. Now, we have to create communities that are strong enough to value the different points of view as enriching sources of generativity, of new ideas, of new possibilities. But that's hard to do because the new ideas are disturbing to some people. In the same way that it was disturbing to my parents that I decided to leave medicine, or disturbing to 20 years ago, and still very much now, today, for many churches, and certainly Orthodox synagogues and many other religious groups, when you get a family that has a gay member that wants to now promote a revision of the value set or the interpretation of text, or even the prioritization of sins. Okay, so maybe we'll consider it still a sin, but is it a big sin or is it a tiny sin? Or maybe it's not a sin at all. That's a bigger revision of the text. But those challenges, those differences are divisive. And the challenge is, how do we continue to keep people bonded around the commonalities so that they can see the differences as generative, as a way of keeping the question, how do we bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, as a living question that nobody has answered yet. For example, I remember speaking about this 20 years ago to the House of Bishops of the Anglican Church and Episcopal Church, and they were just about to undertake a schism. And I said to them, why are you so preoccupied with homosexuality? You know, at most it's 3 to 5% of your population. Whereas studies show that as many as 20 to 25% of the population has experienced sexual abuse, and certainly infidelity. So why don't you first become literate in talking about sexuality at all, so that you can do the proper kind of ministry to the people in your community that are suffering because they don't know what to do with their appetites, or they were abused as children and now they're abusing their children, or they don't know how to rekindle the sparks of romance within their marriage. I mean, why don't you figure out how to talk to, mainstream sexual, the dilemmas that are so much at odds with people living, figuring out how to bring, the divine spirit back into their loving relationships. And stop preoccupying yourself with this side issue. But the side issues, they have a lot of pizzazz. They're galvanizing. So I think we lose easily. We lose. So I wished I could say that the United States is a beautiful example. I mean, the churches are struggling. I mean, I was working with the United Methodist Church in one of the, sort of a 4,000 preachers from around the United States and some outside the U.S. in the Methodist movement just last month, and they're about to schism because of the gay issue. That's not tormenting you anymore, but it's tormenting them, and it's really sad. And how to keep people in the conversation with their differences, hoping that over time people's values will evolve. Now, you face a lot of mainstream churches are facing a different challenge. How do you get young people engaged? A lot of you have children or grandchildren, and they're not participating. How do we get the juice back into the spiritual juice that, young people want, but they get it otherwhere. They get it in Buddhist practices. You go visit the Dalai Lama and he's surrounded by Jewish Buddhists, because Jews can't get the juice in Judaism, in a typical congregation. So they go other places where they can have a spiritual experience. How can you be innovative in experimenting to create spiritual experience that will really turn on people who are hungry for a spiritual experience, particularly during this coronavirus crisis where, God knows people are spending a hell of a lot of time alone. And I think that's a wonderful, innovative challenge for you to be addressing, as well as all sorts of the other challenges people are facing in their daily lives, loneliness, poverty, fear of homelessness, what to do with their children at home, how are they going to stay afloat. There's so many wonderful opportunities for churches to help people learn how to be generous with one another and to keep each other from drowning during this year. And even helping people through the heartbreak, because people are dying, and people are suffering, and there is no end to the heartbreak. There won't be a vaccine widely available. If we're lucky, by next summer. All of us will have a vaccine in our bodies, if we're very lucky, by next summer. That's a long time. People are going to have to make it through the winter. A lot more dying and a lot more terror of homelessness and there's so much work for our communities to do rather than fighting about stuff. So I wished I could say America were, you know, a beacon of lessons and hope. I'm sure there are at the micro level. But you know, let's take the issue of indigenous communities. It's a big issue in your country and in mine. Your country's way ahead. You're a good 20 or 30 years ahead of the United States in people, particularly people in the religious communities, and in the Anglican community and in evangelical communities. So much more ahead, and also government in owning up to the atrocities, in owning up to the residential boarding schools, you know, to what it meant to rip children out of their, you know these stories. After a few generations of taking children out of their families, by the third generation, you know, nobody's experienced growing up in a normal family. How do you learn how to parent except by growing up in a family and watching your parents? But now who's your model? If your model are people in a residential boarding school, sometimes if you're lucky, who've been loving, and sometimes if you're unlucky, who've been abusive. But even if they've been loving, it's still not mom and dad, it's still not parents. So now how do we repair those wounds? And there's such a central role to play, you know, for churches to play. You know, one image I have is setting up a lemonade stand, you know, in a reserve, and saying, I'm open for business. Tell me your story. Give me your outrage. I'll receive all the anger you've got, all the bellyfuls of anger and tears that you've got, as long as you want to generously give them to me, and to receive all that anger with grace. And you may have to sit at that lemonade every day for months, and you may have to sit at that lemonade stand every day for years, just receiving generations of heartache and pain. And there's an extraordinary gift that people have, even if you yourself didn't participate in any of that. But we're all beneficiaries, you know, as white people. Those of us who are white are all beneficiaries of a system in which we were given privileges. We had opportunities that other people didn't have. Most of us grew up with families. So Canada is way ahead of America, and even being able to own up to the harms of the past. You know, that in the name of love, we took away from people their indigenous languages, their indigenous religious practices. We thought we were saving pagan babies. I mean, so I think people did it with a heart of love. It wasn't easy living, you know, as a missionary, going off into the countryside and beginning to preach the word. It wasn't easy. It was not an easy life. People did it out of love, but it was also arrogant. It didn't start by listening. What cultural DNA do we want to conserve? What is already here that's worth building from? Is there anything in my difference that would enrich the DNA that's already here? That's what adaptive change is all about. Starting with assuming that what's already there has value. Not trying to throw out the baby with the bathwater and doing a revolution, but creating productive evolutions. So you start with a question, you start with listening. Tell me, how does life work? How do you make life work? And then, how is life not working? And then say, well, I have some ideas that might help enrich your practices. So maybe we can come up with a version 1.0 hybridization and innovate. And maybe I can enrich you. But that wasn't the approach of the missionaries over the last 500 years. With the army on the government came in, with the business people on the one, the army with the government came in, and then with the business folks on one end that were going to take advantage of the opportunities, and the church on the other to save pagan babies. Missionaries all around the world have didn't go into places asking what's already beautiful and wonderful and meaningful and of value in this local culture. They went in assuming that there's not that much there that's of value. Let us tell you. And inadvertently, again with good intentions, did a lot of harm. So now how do we in this generation repair hundreds of years of harm? That's part of our mission, I think. In the United States, we have to repair the harm of racism. And that's a hard harm to repair. It's easy to get outraged about racism. But I think we repair these harms through a compassionate challenge. And this leads me back to one of the themes that we raised this morning about losses. So let me digress for a moment and talk about losses. In a stable environment, you don't really need change. You just need to keep doing what you know how to do, and life can be wonderful. And we lived that way for most of human evolution for millions of years. And certainly for nearly all of the 200,000 years since we became human beings the way we are. That happened about 200,000 years ago. And for nearly all of that time, we lived as hunters and gatherers. Small communities, a lot of land, stable environments that changed very slowly. So you didn't need leadership. You simply needed people who learned from their elders how to organize the small community of 15 to 20 people, and where to go in the rainy season and where to go in the dry season, and how to protect yourselves from enemies or animals, and how to maintain order. You didn't need leadership, you just needed authoritative management. Elders doing their job. But with the advent of agriculture, we began to live in these great big communities because we could store food. And now with our same brains, our same chemistry and wiring, geared to small collections of people of 15 or 20, we're now, even in your smallest congregations, you may have, 40 or 50 people or families. That's a lot more people than any hunter-gatherer ever had to deal with. And some of you have much larger congregations. So we need a lot of culture to make us work. Like we need a lot of software to make our hardware function in our large social systems. And the world is changing a lot faster than it did because we live in an ecosystem that we created in part in terms of society and economics and so forth, politics. So this adaptive process is mainly conservative. I'll show you a quick slide. again, most cultural DNA is to be conserved. So if this is the case, then actually the lesson we learn from nature is that highly transformative change is also highly conservative. It has to be, otherwise it won't take root in the local culture. It would be trying to graft something onto another thing that won't take root. Or it would be trying to mate two animals and their offspring they can't create offspring. You know, so but the DNA that's to be lost is significant to people. Now, most of you know the phrase, people resist change. But it's not really true. People love change when they're sure it's a good thing. If your government, tomorrow were to say, we've just struck gold, and all of a sudden we have, $1 trillion, and we're going to spread it out and give each of you a check for $20,000, and nobody would say, don't change my life. People would welcome it. Nobody gives back a winning lottery ticket. People love change when they know it's a good thing. People aren't stupid. We all love change when it's a good thing. What people resist is not change per se. What people resist is loss. I saw that comment, gold mining is devastating. That's true. All right, well, let's say they came up with another source of wealth. So to practice leadership requires us to have a real reverence for the pains of change. We have to be good diagnosticians to assess what kind of change are we asking people to suffer through. Now again, people are willing to suffer loss if they see the reason why. It's on behalf of the conservative values that people are willing to take losses. People are willing to send their children off to war, the greatest loss of all, potentially, if they see the reason why. And again, the reason why is almost anchored in those values that are to be conserved, that come out of our tradition and heritage. So we need to be good diagnosticians on the nature of the losses. And I would like to suggest 3 different categories of loss. Because as you scan your own parishioners or your own community, it's important to try to understand what kind of loss am I asking people to go through, or what kind of loss are they currently experiencing as a product of the COVID crisis. One category of loss are direct material losses. Wealth, food, status, significance, control, power. These are direct losses, and nobody likes to give those things up. A second category of loss is competency. Adaptive change throws us into incompetency. It takes us across the frontier of our current competence. Here's a little graphic to depict that. What happened to it? Sorry about that. Let me see if I can. There it is.
There, we can see it. If you just advance your arrow, I think it'll come up.
Okay. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Trina. There's nothing like a technical problem and somebody has got the technical answer. You know, we all love to live in our areas of competence. We're all proud of what we've achieved, all that we've learned in our lives. You know, you've learned how to analyze text. You've learned how to shape a sermon. You've learned how about budgets. You've learned lots of things, you know. Some of you have gained other professional areas of expertise. And these are enormous sources of pride to all of us. And we tend to like to inhabit and stay within our area of competence. But adaptive challenges throw us across the frontier. The title of your conference. And it's hard to go across that frontier because we risk feeling ashamed or embarrassed at feeling incompetent. We risk being seen as incompetent in the eyes of people with whom we identify. So it takes a lot of courage to move across that frontier, as well as a lot of support. One of the great blessings you can bestow on a community is to bless their incompetence and make it permissible for people to be learning. Because to really learn, you have to be in that zone of incompetence so that you can push the frontier outwards and develop a new frontier of competence. And the COVID crisis is throwing all of us in this zone of incompetence and learning. And it's frightening for people. And it's a significant loss. Now, children, they're not so proud. I mean, children are proud of their competence, but children also have a lot of permission to stumble and fall and keep learning. But that becomes less permissible the more authority you get in life. The more people begin to turn you into an authority figure or an elder or a wise person, or in my case, a professor, the more difficult it is to expose the edges of your competence and to be learning publicly along with everybody else. But in the COVID crisis, all of us are thrown across the frontier of their competence. I've had to figure out how to teach online. I'm really good at teaching in person. I've been doing it for 37 years. I've developed a whole method of teaching below the neck as well as above the neck, matters of heart and spirit and behavior, as well as intellect, teaching experientially based on people's cases. But I don't know how to teach online. I've resisted it for a decade. But now I'm forced to. And now I'm discovering, hey, this is actually kind of neat. I'm learning stuff. Now, it was great that my dean and administration blessed my incompetence along with everybody else's. We were all at this frontier together. It's easier, it's less shameful to be incompetent when, you're sharing the misery. The point is, though, that we all have to move across this frontier, and it's a significant loss. The third form of loss we mentioned earlier, the loss of loyalty. The risk of betraying, or at least the risk of being accused of betraying, the risk of being seen by others as betraying, the expectations that they expect you to fulfill. And this is probably the most painful of all sources of loss. People frequently would rather kill or die than risk being accused of betrayal. This came home to me working with students of mine from Palestine and Israel. And I've often thought about the nature of the losses that peace would require, the nature of the compromises. And you could say, well, it's compromises in terms of land, and so forth. But the compromises are much deeper than that. You could make a very same analogy to a person in the United States who grows up in the South, you know, and now is being challenged to reinvestigate some of their racist assumptions. Imagine in Palestine, a boy grows up in a refugee camp. And he's the eldest grandson. And finally he comes of age, and his grandfather calls him to his bedside. And the grandfather is dying and says to his grandson, "My grandson, you are the eldest." And the grandfather then takes out a piece of cloth out of from underneath his pillow, and he unravels this piece of cloth, and inside this piece of cloth is an old rusty key. And the grandfather says to his grandson, "My grandson, here is the key to our home. It is your job to take our family back home." So now that grandson, takes that key, he wraps it up very carefully back in the cloth, he hides it in a very safe place, and he feels deeply obligated and proud of the responsibility his grandfather has given him to return his family home. Imagine the very same young man grows up in a Jewish family, and he grows up also with a loving grandfather. And his loving grandfather says to him, "You know, my grandson," as he comes of age, "you are the miracle generation. You're the first generation in 2,000 years that can take our people home to live on the same soil as our patriarchs and matriarchs, as Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Leah and Sarah and Rivka and Rachel. So fulfill our dream, the dream that every year on the holidays we would say, next year in Jerusalem, take our people home." So now that son grows up and begins to raise his own family, and sure enough, a war takes place, and there's the opportunity to go back and live on those same stones. Now, the peacemakers come to your village. The Arabic peacemaker, comes to your refugee camp and says, "I have good news. We're going to create a peace agreement with the Israelis, and we're going to have our own country." And the grandson says, "Okay, yes, but I want to go home." And the Palestinian, Yasser Arafat in this case, says, "Yes, well, we're going to create our own country, but you're not going to be able to go home." Now, actually, Yasser Arafat never says that, because he knows that if he were to say that, he would be assassinated. Because what he's asking that grandson to do is to bury the key. Because the compromise required is a compromise in which that grandson has to realize that that old family house from 4 generations ago may no longer exist. It's probably on land that now is filled with high-rise apartment buildings in the middle of a city. Maybe Haifa, maybe Tel Aviv. Or it's farm that has been now lived in by Israelis for 3 or 4 generations. Do you really want to go re-inhabit that town and live surrounded by Israelis? So the reality of being able to go home is unrealistic. But what does that mean to the grandson? Well, the grandson now has to renegotiate the loyalty to his grandfather. He has to find some way of saying to grandfather, "Grandfather, you gave me this assignment. I cannot fulfill the assignment with the specificity that you've asked. I have to create a new home for our family. And maybe if we establish good relations, we will be able to go visit those olive trees and have a picnic. And maybe we can become friends with the people living in that old house. But we're not going to be able to go home. I have to disappoint you. Even though I honor all of your love and wisdom, all of your lessons. Now, that work of renegotiating that loyalty is unimaginable. It is the work of peacemaking. It's so unimaginable that that grandson would rather stay in that refugee camp, or engage in behavior that will, in the long run, not really be productive. Terrorism or simply just staying there. Now take the parallel or the other image, the Israeli. Now he's living in his settlement, in Bethlehem or outside, overlooking the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried, where there's a mosque. And now the Israeli peacemaker comes to town. He says, good news, we're going to have peace. But you're going to have to leave, because this is now going to be part of the Palestinian country. So you can have 80% of your dream, but you can't have 100% of your dream. Some part has to be lost. Now, it's the same internal wrestle. The Israeli settler says, well, I need to be true to my grandfather. And then, of course, the grandfather has anchored the teaching in sacred text. This is the promise. So now actually we have a divine right to be here. So it's all rationalized. But basically it's not about text, and it isn't about religion, and it's certainly not about God. It's about grandfather. It's about grandmother. It's about our loyalty to the people who gave us those words, who gave us that command, return home. And the renegotiating of that internal loyalty is a long, hard emotional process. And it requires very delicately designed holding environments, churches, in a sense, for people to be able to engage those conversations where they sort through again, what cultural DNA can we keep? How can we continue to honor our ancestors at the same time that we have to make a departure? Because I see a reality that's different than the reality they saw when they gave me those lessons. So that's the third form of loss. And my guess is that's the hardest form of loss. And some of the adaptations that are needed to renew the church are losses that are not simply material losses. Somehow you got to figure out how to get people to give more money. I understand. There's some, you got to figure out how to get your hands in people's pockets and purses and get them to be generous. And of course, you want to help them realize that generosity will also give them something back in turn. They're part of the generosity. The act of love itself is a gift. But these losses in regard to competence, I don't know how to sing that hymn that way. I'm really happy singing the hymn the way I've always sung it. I really like the old interpretation of that text. Don't start telling me there's a new interpretation of that text. Or for some people, they're going to have to learn new jobs. The old jobs are going away. They're really up against a big frontier in regard to livelihood. Everybody's up against a frontier with children right now and figuring out how are you going to teach your children at home, because schools aren't functioning. So we have to create these learning environments. You know, churches have to become schoolhouses where that help people learn all the things they need to learn as they're being challenged, but also given new opportunity. You know, to be better parents than they ever were, because now they know how to do more of the teaching function. To do better parents than they were, because now they know how to juggle work and family at the same time. Before, they could segregate it into structures. I'm not home. I'm off in the office. Now I'm home. The structure helped segregate those two activities. Now you've got to figure out how to create boundaries at home. That requires different disciplines in the family. You know, and if we really, and those families who begin to figure out those new rules of the road and new disciplines will have expanded capacity when kids finally go back to school. And then same thing with whatever innovations or changes are going to require people to depart from some of the tradition. You know, if you grow up in a Southern family in the United States with ancestors who go back to the Civil War, 1860 to 1865, and somebody says to you, you know, racism is systemic, you're part of the problem. You know, you have to dig into your heart. They're really challenging you. We're challenging ourselves to be able to say to our grandfather, you know, you taught me so many wonderful things. You know, how to play ball, how to count, how to read. You held my hand, you know, when Daddy was sick. You know, you loved me in so many ways. You tossed me on your knee. You know, there's nothing deeper than my love for you. And at the same time, you also taught me, when you taught me about Bible and you taught me what was right and wrong, you also taught me that white people are more capable than black people. And therefore, white people should be responsible for the life of the community. And therefore, white people should have authority and black people should not have authority. And you know, with all the good things you taught me, you also taught me these things, which I now realize isn't right. Now, it's hard for people to renegotiate those lines of code, that software that they've internalized from the people they've loved. And to begin to tease out what part from my ancestry is precious and essential, but what part is no longer good. And so, you know, we can say to a person with racist orientations, you're wrong. We can throw at them all sorts of moral outrage, but that isn't going to change them. Because what we're asking them to do needs to be asked with a lot of heart. It's a big request. It's a big demand. In some ways, it's easier on the victim side than on the aggressor side. Because the victim isn't ashamed of their ancestor. But the aggressor is ashamed of the ancestor. And how do you come to peace with the fact that your ancestor engaged in shameful behavior? How do you continue to honor the ancestor and yet realize that some of what they did was wrong? The aggressor's trauma, as I call it. I see somebody said the perpetrator trauma. That's right. And I think what's traumatic about it isn't only the direct injury, it's also the work it takes to come to terms with, renegotiating these loyal bonds. And risking being told, how dare you talk to me that way? Where did you get that terrible idea? You've been hanging around in that university too long. You've got too many of those liberal friends. Go wash yourself off before you come back to my dinner table. Cleanse yourself of those ideas. And it's hard to stay in the game, to stay in that creative tension where you're holding people in disequilibrium. You know, you're holding those family members and you're saying, I challenge you. I love you. I honor you 90% of the way. But this 10%, you know, I'm challenging you. And they'll saying you go away, and you say, no, I'm not going away. I'm coming back to dinner, and I'm not washing off, you know, and we're going to have a nice dinner. And we're going to talk about all the things that we share, but we're also going to talk about these things that are problematic. You know, and maybe you knock on the door and they open the door and they say, go away, and you keep knocking on the door. Because when you're practicing leadership, you're the one doing the challenging. And if you're doing the challenging, you have to hold the people you're challenging, because they're the ones who've got a lot to lose. They're the ones who deserve compassion. The people who are oppositional and resist change, they deserve the most compassion because they have the most to lose. They're the ones who you are asking the most of. The people who agree with you, they're allies. You know, they come cheap. You know, they're not giving anything up. You know, the problem with a lot of our communities is we keep talking with the people who are like us. We keep dancing with the people who are like us. And that's easy. You know, it's sweet because we share so much. But the real work comes from, and the generativity too, comes from bridging those divides. So again, I think leadership requires a real respect for the pains of change and listening carefully. You know, is it a material change? Is it a competency loss? You know, or is it a refashioning of loyalty? You know, a revision of some of those lines of code that we've inherited or that we've identified with in other people. One can have a Yankees hat and still be a Red Sox fan. One can even appreciate that the Yankees is a pretty great team most years and still hate them. You know, that's like, okay. Or maybe you hate them, but you know you're jealous of them. You know, the hate is tempered with appreciation, so forth. You know, so anyway, that was a very, very long-winded answer to somebody's question.
So do you want to move into your other thoughts about your presentation this afternoon then?
Well, let me see if there are any. Yes, let me show you one more graphic to depict another property of adaptive work. So in this graphic, we see the difference between a technical problem and an adaptive problem in terms of its predictability. We had a great military general in the United States who was in charge of all of our allied forces, including Canadian forces, British forces, underground in France, in organizing the invasion of Normandy on D-Day in 1944. Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower spent with a lot of people more than a year planning that invasion. It was the most complicated military effort in probably human history. Eisenhower said, we never could have gotten onto the beaches of Normandy without a plan. And the moment we hit the beach, we had to discard the plan. Planning is really valuable. He said it when he became president of the United States. He said, planning is invaluable and plans are worthless. Now, that's not entirely true. I think he was exaggerating, but nevertheless, he understood that the moment when you're working an adaptive problem, the moment you begin to move into action, you can't really predict what's going to unfold. Reality unfolds in unpredictable ways. People receive challenges in unpredictable ways. Now, there are a lot of problems, very complex problems, for which we can create a critical path. Some of those beautiful buildings in Vancouver, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, some of those complexes. But engineers are so good that they can predict the arrival point within weeks, and they can predict the budget sometimes within 2%. They can create a critical path, and they can stay over time on that critical path. Maybe they have to make micro adjustments along the critical path, but frequently they've even planned for the need to make those micro adjustments depending on, the weather or supply chains and so forth. But adaptive challenges aren't like that. It's more like playing jazz than classical music. One has to improvise. One has to ask oneself every day, or at least periodically, where are we now? And one has to have the mental flexibility to be able to then take corrective action. Maybe if you're lucky, over that same period of time, you land at C in the vicinity of B. But maybe not. The point is that in adaptive work, you can't predict. Now, that means that we have to prepare our community to understand that there are a lot of problems amenable to technical problem solving, where there is some authority on the subject who you can hire or call or read about or Google, who can tell you what needs to be done. There is a doctor who can cure the illness. But there are also a lot of challenges that are adaptive, that require us to discover and learn and innovate and build new capacity. Now, many challenges come bundled. They don't come with a little red flag on your desk. I'm technical, I'm adaptive. So treat me with authoritative command and authoritative expertise, or treat me by creating a social learning, an organizational, a community learning process, a discovery process. They don't come flagged like that. They come bundled. Sometimes the challenges coming across your, metaphorically, your desk are 10% technical and 90% adaptive. Sometimes it's 80% technical and 20% adaptive. So part of your job is to begin to tease apart which parts of this challenge are going to require people to build new capacity, and which parts of this challenge can we farm out to an expert, or maybe you're the expert because you've been there before, and you can solve it with clear, decisive direction. Now, it's much easier to move people to engage in adaptive work if they understand, first of all, that there are these two categories of problems. So I think part of your challenge right away is to begin to educate people that there are these two different categories of problems, or at least across a spectrum, that have different ratios depending on the nature of the challenge. If people do not understand that many challenges are adaptive, they will put a lot of pressure on you to treat all challenges as if they were technical. The most common source of failure that I've seen in my career is a diagnostic failure. People treat adaptive challenges as if they were technical problems. They keep throwing technical fixes at the problem, and sometimes they run out of time. Instead of doing the adaptive work early on and using the time they have to figure out the new adaptation. A good example during the coronavirus crisis is in the education system. School superintendents back in April knew that kids are not going to be able to go back to school in a normal way in September. Probably not for a full academic year. There were lots of models that said as soon as you reopen schools, people will get infected again and you'll have to close them down again. So you can open it up, you can be innovative in opening them up a little bit, hybrid models, but the odds are you're going to have to close them down. And at best, you know, kids will go a little bit to school, somewhat to school, but mainly not over the course of the year. Now, that was a really hard reality. One of the ways people deal with adaptive challenges is to avoid them. And we see a lot of work avoidance mechanisms, work avoidance patterns of behavior in this green line. People don't want to stay in a productive period of stress, so they opt for various work avoidance mechanisms, patterns. And the patterns come in two basic forms. It's important to recognize these patterns because a big part of your leadership challenge is to counteract them. You know, to find ways to bring people back to the work. And the two primary ways of avoiding adaptive work are pretty basic, normal human patterns. The first pattern is, I feel better if I'm not looking at the problem. So distraction. There are a lot of forms of distracting people from staring at a hard problem. Now, different organizations and different political cultures, they have their favorite forms of distraction. Some like the distraction of hiring an outside consultant, and now we don't have to think about it. So by the time the consultant issues the report, you know, there's no longer any urgency and the report goes in a drawer. A common form of distraction is just looking at the part of the problem that's amenable to technical solutions. People only look at that part of the problem that fits their competence. Lying is a very common form of distraction. President Trump has written a whole new textbook on the political tactics of distraction. Like a fighter aircraft trying to avoid being shot down, throwing out decoy, pieces of metal and plastic. Donald Trump every day creates distractions so that people aren't actually looking at the ways in which he's failing the people. So you should be on the lookout for various ways that under strain, rather than staying in the pressure cooker, people try to turn down the heat by forming a distraction. You know, a nice distraction is blaming you. Now let's argue about, how we've got the wrong priest or minister or pastor, preacher. Now, it's not to say you're the perfect preacher or the perfect pastor, those of you who are pastors and preachers. It's just to say that, in good times, people don't complain about you. But all of a sudden, in the bad times, you become interesting. This begins to overlap with the second major form of work avoidance, which is displacing responsibility. I feel better if it's not my problem. So, blaming you is not only a distraction, it's also a way of avoiding their own responsibility. The illusion is if only we had the perfect pastor, our problems would be solved. Some Americans right now think, well, if only we have, the perfect president, our problems would be solved. But the point is, even if Joe Biden gets elected president of the United States, which I think would be a godsend, the work is not going, we can't go to sleep because, again, it took 40 years to create this polarization. It's going to take a lot of people, distributed leadership across all of our communities in the United States, to begin to repair the damage and to begin to rebuild trust. So there are all sorts of characteristic ways in which people displace responsibility. They blame authority figures. They create scapegoats. What I was saying to the House of Bishops 20 years ago of the Episcopal Church, you know, you're using homosexual behavior as a distraction. You know, you're displacing the issue over there. Why don't you take a look at you know, because even if the rate of sexual abuse in your community isn't 25%, you know, which it is in the general population or even more, maybe in your parish it's only 5%. But that means if you have 100 families, there are 5 people in your family, 5 children in your family that are suffering. And if we expand it from just sexual abuse to the pain of infidelity, the suffering in marriages, you know, then the percentage goes even higher. Why don't you figure out how to do that? I mean, that's where your work is, instead of arguing on the side issue. But we do that frequently. You know, we displace attention to a side issue, or we displace responsibility. War is a good displacement of responsibility. The problem's out there. It's not over here. So, so as we improvise in leadership, one of the unpredictable elements in adaptive work is you never know which form of work avoidance people will engage in. Now, I think it's really important to have compassion about this as well. Work avoidance is not conscious and intentional. It's simply a normal human response to facing a challenge that looks overwhelming. A challenge that's going to take them beyond their frontier of competence. A challenge that begins to put into question some of the heritage that they feel loyal to. So even when we begin to spot work avoidance and begin to draw people's attention to the central questions, or ask them to take responsibility, to have shared responsibility, collective responsibility for their collective problem, we have to understand that the resistance to the losses that is going to generate is a human resistance. And the compassion then helps us begin to pace and sequence the adaptive work. You know, because if you give people too much work to do all at once, they're going to get indigestion. And they'll spit up. And they'll spit you up too. So you have to manage the pressure cooker to give people as much work as they can tolerate at whatever level of absorption, whatever level of digestion that they can stand. And that requires a lot of listening, because you've got to be tracking, you know, where are they in regard to being overwhelmed? How do they need help in figuring out how to feel less ashamed at being incompetent? How to be innovative? Who could help them? Who do I need to hybridize them with in order to come up with ideas on what to do about kids that are 6 years old versus another family where the kids are 12 years old? You know, how do I help bring people together so they can begin to cross-fertilize and support each other? And it's the resistances that give you a clue to the ways in which the adaptive work is challenging to people.
Ron, Ron, I wonder if now might
Stop
be a
there and
moment just,
yes, good, thank you.
I was just going to say, I wonder if now might be a moment just to take a 5-minute bio break. I think we've been
Great
going for
idea.
a little while.
Yeah, forgot about that.
So,
Okay, great. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back, have a little more conversation and questions, and then thank you so much for your trust. I can't believe how patient you are. I get such Zoom fatigue, and I can't believe I've been, I feel like Fidel Castro, like talking on and on for hours and hours. Please do forgive me.
no problem.
Okay, I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Alan, if you would put up a timer, that would be great. Thanks. Folks, a reminder, if you're still around, to grab your communion elements. Welcome back, everyone. I hope a little stretch and opportunity to move around a bit will provide you a bit of refreshment for the last little bit of our time together. Thank you, Ron. I hope you have had a chance to scroll through some of the comments in the chat with all the words of affirmation.
No, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I'm so glad that some of you find this worthwhile.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you
there's been a couple requests for your slides, so I'm wondering if you're able to share those with us and we could put them on.
Yeah, I'm happy to email them to you. You know, yeah, sure. I'll just do that, Trina. You know,
Thanks.
I'll send them to you. And
yeah, and I'll forward them around to. We'll put them up on the Whova site for folks.
Okay.
So thanks. So I know there's a number of questions. I have a lineup of people, but before we do that, there's quite a bit of interest in your reference that you were going to talk a little bit about survival in the context of leadership and self-care. So
yeah, yeah. Let me say there's kind of two sets of ideas I'd like to talk about in our last period of time together and share with you. One is about crisis. We're in a particular time, and there are some particular properties of crises leadership that I'd like to discuss with you that you'll feel, I'm sure it'll feel quite familiar to you because we've been in this crisis now for more than a half a year. And then I'd like to share some ideas about sustaining yourself. Let me again go back to using some slides if I could. So just to summarize where we've been so far, just to give you a sense of how I define terms, I told you at the beginning that, you know, we're living in an era where leadership studies itself as an immature area. So this is how I define leadership. Again, I continue to evolve this definition itself and tinker with the wording, but this is the basic sense of it. And in some ways, it could be summarized as, you know, the practice of mobilizing adaptive change. And then in the bullet points, it describes it a little more fully. So let me say something about crisis. These are the three key properties of crisis. Most crises have two phases, a short acute phase and then a longer phase in which the underlying issues that generated the crisis in the first place need to be worked out. Like in an emergency room of a hospital. The task in the emergency room is to stabilize the patient. And then once you've stabilized the patient, you can then work on the underlying problems that made the patient sick in the first place. And once they're stabilized, you take them out of the emergency room and send them off to the regular, to a regular bed, or maybe to the intensive care unit, where the underlying issues get addressed. Now, I think this is a good, useful, basic construct in thinking about crises in general. Here's a way of depicting it, and this is similar to the graph you saw before, where we talked about the levels of stress that were productive. So crises, you know, at point A here, this little red dot, is that moment when all of a sudden the crisis is sparked and the system goes into stress. It goes into disequilibrium. And that, of course, then invokes a strong problem-solving response. Now, for a lot of crises, the emergency phase is short. You know, you can stabilize the situation pretty quickly. You know, it could be that you have a devastating storm and it does a lot of damage. But we've got already a lot of mechanisms in place to deal with that acute phase and to stabilize people. You know, we have fast ways of giving people temporary housing, create temporary schools. We've got hospitals and so forth, ways to keep people going, to stabilize the situation. And then we can work in the adaptive phase, the challenge of rebuilding those communities and helping people rebuild their lives. What's very unusual about our current crisis is that the emergency phase is lasting so long. We are still in the acute phase. We're still in, to some degree, the emergency room. The underlying challenges that are to be addressed, they made us vulnerable to the crisis, or the underlying challenges that are being revealed by the crisis, social inequity, poor education, certain populations are a lot more vulnerable than others. In the United States, along ethnic lines, and so forth. Those underlying challenges await moving past the stabilization phase to really address properly. So in America, the coronavirus crisis has surfaced the issue of racism. Police brutality with a racial component has been a real problem in America for decades. My first book in 1994 begins in the introduction with a case like that in Los Angeles when a gentleman named Rodney King, was brutalized by the police. But the virus has surfaced the inequity in a whole new way. Now, we're not going to successfully address that crisis during this acute phase. And when we finally do have a vaccine, and when the patient is then stabilized, we still have left on the table that problem to address. So this emergency phase itself is long. And that means each of you in a position of authority, because each of you in being a lay leader or being a minister or a pastor, you have authority in people's eyes. People look to you in a crisis with more yearning for help, with more dependency for answers than in normal times. They're putting more weight on your shoulders to know what to do. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about how somebody in authority can approach operating during this prolonged acute phase. It is important for those people who are most at risk that you provide some decisive action, that people feel that you are competent on the technical challenges, that you are organizing what can be organized to keep people from drowning. Because people look to their authorities, going all the way back to animal societies. They look to their silverback gorilla to provide direction for food, protection from danger, and order. And they're going to look to you for that, and have been looking to you for that. But it's also important that you begin to inform people that this is an adaptive context demanding the need to improvise. You can't give people all the answers they want. And you've got to educate people with courage. Now, we see a lot of people in politics, in particular, who want to fake it, who don't want to tell people that they need to adapt, who want to tell people, we'll get by this in 2 months. We'll close down the government for 2 weeks, and then everything will open up again. Who are feeding people fake answers, fake remedies, because it's so hard to tell people, look, let's stabilize, but we're going to have to improvise. I don't have all the answers. We're going to have to keep learning as we're going down the road. We're going to keep having to rehuddle and reformulate whatever plan we put into place. We're going to have to keep modifying it over time. And we're going to have to do that as community. So one of your challenges then is to manage the disequilibrium You have to provide a sense of calm and holding, that people feel that you're not panicking, because if you're panicking, they're going to panic more readily. So you have to be a sort of source of confidence. You have to give people faith in their own resilience. And sometimes that means you will have to fake it until you can make it, in a sense, because you're not going to feel confident. You're going to have dark nights where you feel a loss of confidence. You're going to feel overwhelmed. Your heart will be broken. If it hasn't yet been broken in the last 6 months, the odds are it will be broken in the next 6. And you have to be ready for heartbreak and not lose faith. One of my favorite moments in the Bible is when Moses gets to the Promised Land. He gets there pretty fast. According to Numbers, he gets there within 12 to 18 months. And then he sends 12 scouts, one from each tribe, to find out what's in the Promised Land. Is it flowing with milk and honey? And the scouts come back and they say to Moses, the land is a fruitful land. It's flowing with milk and honey. But it also has cities and armies. And these soldiers, they look like giants. And we will look like grasshoppers in their eyes, because we are grasshoppers in our own eyes. Quite an amazing text. So then 10 out of the 12 scouts say, take us back to Egypt. We would rather be secure in slavery than risk dying in that land. And at that moment, Moses fell on his face. In the Hebrew, it says he fell on his face. He and his brother Aaron. They fall on their face. And it also says they did it publicly. They fell on their face before the assembly. Now, falling on your face in Hebrew means crying. These guys went into despair, crying their hearts out. Moses thought his job was done. 18 months, carry the people across, get them to the Promised Land. These were known trade routes. Nobody was lost, because all of our ancestors came out of Africa during the last 40,000 years along those trade routes before they inhabited Europe and Asia, North America, South America. They all came out of those trade routes. So Moses discovers at that moment that this problem was not technical. God did not have the solution to this problem. He did not have a magic stick that he could throw down and magically, tap and get water out of a stone. This was an adaptive challenge. How do you take a people that had the self-identity of slaves and turn them into a self-governing community with faith in a God that you cannot see? That was going to take time, because he had to build capacity of people for self-governance, for faith. And then they spent another 38 and a half years in the desert. They weren't lost. They were in a training program. He was engaged in the evolution of the culture, the evolution of people's capacity, requiring, tragically, the death of a whole generation in order to prepare those people to go across. Of course, the only people who made it across from that generation were the 2 scouts who never lost faith, Joshua and Caleb. The point is, you're going to have a lot of moments of despair. The Bible doesn't tell us how long Moses and Aaron stayed on the ground, with their face to the floor. We don't know how long they cried. Was it a day? Was it a week? Was it 6 months? We don't know how long it took them to finally get up and move forward into the work. So you have to help each other. You're the elders of the church community. And some of you are going to have the darkest nights of despair, and some others of you've got to, be right at hand, with the phone close by, fishing each other out of the water, pumping air back into each other's water wings, because there are moments when you're going to be drowning. And you have to expect that. You have to plan for it in your partnership with each other. Somebody spoke at the break before about presence, really in an elegant way about presence. Presence really matters in a time of crisis. People need to see your face. And even if they can only see your face or hear your voice on the phone or through the internet, it matters. And one of the violent and awful things about Zoom and the internet or FaceTime is that when you leave the meeting, it is abrupt. Even goodbyes are violently abrupt. I've gotten into the habit with my students when I have, 100 people on a screen to be the last person to leave the meeting. And, and then I sort of create a hallway where people can linger and ask me more questions and we can continue to talk, just to try to soften that transition. So your presence and being creative with how to be a presence to people. Be it the messages that you send them, the practices you try to help them engage in, so that they can hear your voice, as they pray or meditate or hear that, hear that verse, or hear that way of dealing with their child, is invaluable. Again, during this long emergency phase, we're going to have to create a lot of adaptations simply to keep people afloat. The amount of child abuse, of domestic violence is going up a lot right now. Under stress, people are taking out their stress, their feeling, their terror, their fear, their lack of pride, feeling like they're no longer, the identity they've held as the breadwinner, they, now what do? They don't know how to fill their time. But you can help them fill their time, and you can help them know what to do with their dismay when they're feeling incompetent, when they're floundering. Okay. So let me just say a few words that may also be relevant to some of your parishioners about sort of daily practices to be able to lead and stay alive. The first practice I call getting on the balcony. It's really important to help people reflect in the midst of action, to help them get off the dance floor of action, where they're thrown into action, even more so when the music is blaring fast and they're panicking, to help them get on the balcony and detach for a moment and take a deep breath and gain perspective. And it's hard because we're all thrown into life very, very much so in a chaotic way, and it's hard then to help people get on the balcony. But you need to be able to get on the balcony, particularly if you're, playing an authority role in people's lives, so that you can think clearly and more flexibly about the options to consider when you go back on the dance floor and make your next move. Leadership is an iterative process, a circular process of moving from action to reflection, back to action, back to reflection, over and over again. So we have to go from the dance floor to the balcony, back to the dance floor, back to the balcony, over and over again. Now, nobody's very good at doing this alone. We need partners to help us do this. Particularly, we need confidants. People with whom we don't have to manage information. People whom we don't have to worry about what we're sharing. Frequently, these will be people outside our sphere of authority. People outside our particular organization. They may be in a different city or a different town, a different congregation, so that they don't have any immediately competing stakes. You're not asking them to juggle their loyalty to you with their loyalty to other people in the same community. So they can just care about you. You need confidants to pour your heart out to, so that when you feel like Humpty Dumpty, all broken apart, they can help you put yourself back together. There are going to be a lot of days like that, if there haven't already been. You know, Mama said there are going to be days like that. So you need confidants, and I hope you'll use, you know, conferences like this and the history of working together, and new confidants too, new people who can help you, pull you by the collar up to the balcony and get you to take a deep breath and think twice again and 3 times. What's the next right move to make? Particularly to give you ideas, because some of you have run out of ideas. You don't know what to try next. You don't know what next experiment to run. You don't know, you know, in nature, innovation takes place by having lots of small experiments. That's how evolution does it. The diversity in our population is the key to evolution, because you never know in a changing environment who's going to have a little more competency to build from and become the keys to the future. You know, God operates like a mutual fund manager, distributing risk by having lots of experiments all across the population. That's what our diversity is. Each of us is a unique genetic, you know, possibility. And depending on the changing environment, different people will have, you know, a little more competence that others can then rely on. You never know where the brilliant idea will come from. It will often not come from expected places. It may come from a 12-year-old. You know, once I was teaching a course on leadership through sacred text, just an experiment I once ran, and I was working the question, does God learn? Because, you know, a lot of us operate with the idea that God is all-knowing, but I think God learns. And I think if we understood God to be learning, it would be a lot easier. We'd have a lot more permission as elders in our communities to be learning, rather than believe that we need to, as authorities, to also be all-knowing. And I think the Bible has a lot of examples of God learning, starting with Genesis, when God, you know, decides that he's not going to do flooding anymore. Why would God say to Noah, you know, I think flood's the wrong thing to do. I promise you I'm never going to do it again. I mean, obviously God was learning from the flood. It isn't worth the heartache. I can see with you and your sons that you're still people, you're going to make the same damn mistakes. I got to come up with another method. So, you know, then he comes up with a method called a prophet. He calls on Abraham. And the moment he calls on Abraham and he says, you're my partner, the very next verse is Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham talking back to God. What do you mean you're going to kill all those people? How about if we find 50 people? You're going to kill them all? You're going to kill those 50 people? Well, how about if I only find 40? You know, he bargains God all the way down to 10. It's a dialogue. Is God not learning? So I happened to ask my daughter, you know, while I was thinking about these things, we were taking out the laundry. She was only 11 years old. And I said to her, hey, Ani, do you think God learns? You know, I said it as neutrally as I could. And right away she answered, You know, just like a little child knowing which color to pull out of the crayon box. They just immediately take a color. They don't know, they can't explain why. I said, well, now, Ani, why do you think God learns? And she said, well, you know, didn't God make me to be able to crawl before I learned how to walk? God taught me how to learn, so God must know how to learn. And then she said, and not only that, you know, isn't God watching me? So, you know, I'm making mistakes. Isn't God tracking my mistakes? Doesn't God have to learn about me? And I said, well, that's pretty cool theology, Ani. She's only 11. I mean, you know, we have no idea where the genius ideas may come from in our community, you know, to help people stay afloat through this crisis. It may come out of the mouths of babes if we're listening. And one of the key properties of adaptive work is that frequently the innovative ideas are already in the community. If we listen carefully and draw out the intuitions in the community, some of those ideas can then be developed into something real special. The third way in which you can help yourself stay alive is to distinguish yourself from your role and not take personally what isn't personal. When people are really upset with you because you can't deliver decisive answers, of course they are, but it isn't personal. Nobody complains about a manager when he's giving people a raise. They don't say, couldn't you have been nicer when you came into my office and gave me that raise? People don't care about your style when you're giving them good news. People begin to critique you and take it out on you when they don't like the message. You know, your children don't start telling you that you're not being nice when you're giving them exactly the kind of ice cream they want. You know, you could say as nice as you want, you know, as you can possibly, you know, time to go to bed. And when they don't want to turn off the TV, they're going to get upset. It doesn't matter how nice you are. It's the content of the message. And the content of the messages you're giving people are tough messages these days. You know, they need to figure out new ways of parenting, new ways of being friends, new ways of being generous to one another. You know, new ways of praying in privacy, alone at home, new ways of praying in community online. And those are tough challenges. So you have to expect that you're going to be the receiver of a lot of rage and anger, or at least disappointment. And it's important not to take it personally. So one of the ways your confidants can help you is to depersonalize it, so that you can keep your eyes on the people who are upset rather than start getting personally defensive. It's like when I learned how to be a parent, at my best, when my children were upset, I didn't take it personally. But on my bad days, I would take it personally and I'd start getting angry. How can you talk to me that way? And then sometimes I'd start yelling. And then sometimes I'd feel so guilty, I'd yell at them even more for making me yell. Why are you making me yell? Don't you know how I hate losing my temper? You know, as if it's their fault that I'm losing my temper. I mean, they're 5 years old. I'm, you know, whatever. Then I'd go to my study and I'd anesthetize myself, you know. Finally, I'd come out after 2 days of answering email. And by the time I rejoined the family, the problem became me. I was the problem, my distemper. I never found out what was the real problem because I took my eye off the ball. The people who are upset, they're the ones who are upset. Your job is to not let their being upset rub off on you. Your job is to help them being upset, including when they interpret the reason for the upset that it's your fault. Fourth, you stay alive by listening. And, you know, I know a lot of you have been trained in pastoral counseling and you're pretty good at listening, but during this crisis, you've got to be even better. Listening for the different kinds of losses, listening for the kinds of shame, listening for the symptoms of the way people are overwhelmed. And doing less talking. Finally, I think that you need sanctuary. We all need anchors. And one of the anchors is confidants, people. Another really important anchor are daily, regular practices, be it prayer, going to the gym, taking a walk in a park, you know, whatever that practice is. For some people, it's looking at yellow liquid, you know, with ice floating around in it, in a you know, glass. Everybody's got different kinds of sanctuaries. You know, you're religious people, so one of your occupational hazards is that you don't get sanctuary in the way that your parishioners do. So, you know, you got to create sanctuary for yourself. And it's really vital. Because, again, these are heartbreaking times. And lastly, I think it's important not to buy into the myth of measurement. You know, we all end up believing that value can be measured and good can be measured, but you can't measure good. You know, you already know that better than most communities. It doesn't matter if you've got a congregation of 50 souls or 500 souls or 5,000 souls. You can't really measure. You know, in our tradition, it says in the Talmud, it says, you save one life, you save the world. You turn the lights on behind one child's eyes, you can't measure that. So one of the ways you can keep yourself going is to rejoice in the fruits of your good works, to take pleasure in the good that you're doing. You know, to quiet whatever Calvinist, Protestant voices may be somewhere in your heritage, where you're not supposed to take pride in your good works. And to say, quiet down, I need some pride. I need to take some pleasure in the good that I've done. Because there's a heck of a lot of work left to do. And taking a pause, taking a moment to celebrate those good works and to encourage other people to celebrate their good works will help them stay in the game of working the next set of challenges. All right, so maybe I could finish. I haven't done this in many, many years, but it occurred to me that I did this with the House of Bishops. Maybe you wouldn't mind my, because it is the Sabbath today, my Sabbath, you wouldn't mind my bestowing priestly blessings, because even though I'm not a descendant of the priests, as a regular, typical old dad, I'm authorized to bestow blessings. So it being the Sabbath, if you don't mind, as part of the whole reparative process between, you know, my ancestors and your ancestors, if you'll allow me to say, may God bless you and keep you. May she shine her face unto you and be gracious unto you. May he turn his face unto you through these perilous times. Grant you heart, grant you grace, and give you peace. Yevarechecha Yah vayishmarecha, Ya'er panav vichunecha, Yasa panav elecha, V'yasem lecha shalom. All blessings. Thank you for your trust.
Amen. Thank you, Ron. I'm a little bit speechless. I've been imagining this opportunity for so long, and it's just been such a gift to have you with us and to share your wisdom. And I can't express enough my thanks and blessings to you for offering this time for us. So thank you.
It's been a real honor. Thank you. Forgive me for going on and on. You inspired me, and I couldn't stop. So
no, we love it.
Anyway,
and
I hope it's useful to you in your ministries.
Thank you. And we'll I'll be in touch with you as well, just to follow up.
Thank you.
Before we transition, though, I did want to invite Alice and Rennie just to share some of the ways that leadership is going to help us integrate what we've heard from Ron around adaptive leadership going forward. So Allison, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ron. What a beautiful day with you. Trina, thanks for giving me a moment. What I just want to say is that I know that for many of you, you've been reading Ron's work or Susan Beaumont's or other adaptive leaders' work, and you want to know how to deepen that learning for yourself. In the coming months, there are a couple of options for you. One is a 4-week workshop with Susan Beaumont in March, all 4 Fridays in March around her work, How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going. We're also going to be starting and inviting you to identify if you'd like to be part of a circle of practice, a small group of people who are committed to helping each other learn and deepen learning about adaptive leadership. So watch for that invitation. The learning is ongoing, not just ideas, but actual practice in the moment where you find yourself, and we want to meet you there. And the final thing is that in November, if you're interested in the biblical, connecting to the biblical story of change and transition and movement and adaptation, Matt Miofsky will be doing 3 sessions around leaning into the future without fear. So all 3 of those I commend to you and to one another, who are also resources in many important ways. So thank you. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Trina.
Thanks, Allison. I think it's so important for us to not just get this fire hose of information, but to have an opportunity to take it in smaller pieces and integrate it throughout the year. So thank you to leadership for taking that initiative to provide those opportunities for everyone. Over to you, Blair.
My eyes sprung a leak. I'm trying to dry them quickly. Ron, I don't think I've ever been blessed so beautifully in Hebrew before, and I'm so touched. So let me extend to you our gratitude from the entire Council of Pacific Mountain Region. I know that you are, we have studied you. We love your books. I know I do. I've studied from your students. So like it's incredible. And then to bring us something of our tradition, the thing we share, and to mold that and shape that and use it as opportunity to learn from. It's like, ah. So thank you on behalf of the region. I want to say a number of thank yous, so please hang in there with me. Pam Rocker, you rock. Oh my goodness. For you to offer with such grace as we blunder through the kinds of questions so that we don't get it wrong. We want to show up with our best selves, and sometimes we overcompensate, and you just hold that so beautifully. So thank you. Nora Saunders preaches on Sunday, but for being part of our experience, I'm very grateful. Richard Bott, our current moderator, preached with us, for us, at the Celebration of Ministry service just yesterday. It felt like a lifetime ago. And so remember that. Our worship team, Laura Hermacken, Brenda Fox, Tiff McNaughton, our musicians, Jordy Roberts, Bella Kershaw, Casey and Amy Van Wensum, huge, huge thank yous. Big thank you to the folks who kind of do the technical stuff. That's Bob Fillier and Brenda Wolf. Alan Buckingham, man, you made this like this. We've been like, it's like easy peasy. We should buy this bus and go on the road. Like, amazing. So thank you for that. To Peter and Catherine, Peter Jones and Catherine Britton, who stepped in really, really super quickly, I want to say thank you. For those of you who don't know, Graham Brown Miller has been recording the minutes of this meeting, and he's been firing me notes and asking me questions. And so, Graham, I'm very grateful. You bring not only the technical answers, but you bring the person that you are, and I love you for that. I want to thank all the regional staff. You just heard Allison, but Allison is part of a team that embodies assistance and support to congregations experiencing adaptive change. So just huge shout out to the regional staff. There's one person who is completely unflappable in any request that comes his way, and that's the administrative assistant to our executive minister, Mauricio Araujo. I'm sort of connected to him, so I got just choked for a second. And then, of course, the entire region is operating very differently. It's only been just over a year that we experienced this huge kind of earthquake of change, not only at the national church governance level, but in our staffing. And after that earthquake, the dust settled, and then we found Trina Duncan in the executive minister's chair, who holds this. I don't know if you saw the chat all around. Trina Duncan is our Bonnie Henry. How in the leadership and the wisdom, she's already working on what the executive is trying to catch up to, and around communities of faith as a priority, or leadership development and adaptive change, and working with and ensuring that leadership is responding to what is emerging. She's already way ahead of us. And for that, I just am so grateful. Look how she handles the questions in the chats and all of that. So Trina, on behalf of the region, I want to thank you. Jay, you didn't tell me this was going to be this hard. This is the part that I didn't know would be so hard. These people and all of you, you showed up. I want to thank you, members of the region, for showing up. This is the weirdest way to run a meeting. And as weird as it is, there's something intimate about it, like all those videos of our retirees, getting in and seeing them up and close and personal. And then watching Amy sing, and the storytelling last night, and watching Laura offer the blessing last night, this intimate close-up of people just being who they are is pure gift to us. So I know it's weird, and you have given yourself to the experience, and I'm very grateful that you did that.
Can I just break in before worship and just say thank you to Blair, who has been leading this meeting with grace and attention, and with so much heart and so much passion. So thank you, Blair. I know we're pushed for time, so I won't go on, but it is really a gift to be in this ministry with you and with all of you.
So we've already got a motion to adjourn. So I'm going to invite us, my beloveds. I'm going to say that because it's beautiful. My beloveds, let's end our time together with worship. Remember, we will have communion together. I noticed people were calling for single malt scotch. I don't think Jesus would mind. Bless you all. And we'll be in touch. Thank you for being here. Let's worship. Oh, there's a retiree video. Forgive me. Ah, gee, you see? We'll do one more, and then we'll worship.
The first thing I want to say about leadership is that it emerges from listening, or ought to emerge from listening. We need to check our egos at the door. There are critical hallmarks of leadership which apply no matter your style or where it is that you're offering it. The first is to pay attention to what's going on. Listen for the wisdom of the community. And then to ground your decisions in a passion for justice, not expediency, and to seek to embody the gospel. We all have diverse styles in our ministry leadership. And no matter how varied they may be, whether they are from behind in a servanthood role or up front, it's important that we are clear about where our strengths lie, to work with who and what we are authentically. And secondly, that we work to clarify what our mission is, which seems to be the focus of this meeting. How we lead now is much less clear than it was when I was ordained many, many years ago. Today, everything is different. There are no reliable maps. We are really trusting the Spirit. It is an Exodus time. So the Exodus, as we know, was a time of sometimes grumbling about leadership, yearning for the old days, struggling to find direction, and an undermining sense of despair that went on for probably too long. However, it was among the most creative and deeply reflective times in the life of the people of faith. Testing, discerning, relying on leadership who paid attention to God as much as to the people. So these days, as we move into a time of wilderness, pray that we would continue to seek not the past, but a future grounded in the gospel of life and of God's passion for justice. For that end, maybe that alone, is what makes us a people of God. Amen.
Good afternoon and welcome. We join you this afternoon from the sanctuary of the newly renovated, created, visioned place of Oak Ridge United in Vancouver. My name is Brenda Fox and I'm the Office of Vocation Minister for Pacific Mountain Region. Happy to be with you today.
And my name is Stephen Merkovich, and I am here in the invitation of the Pacific Mountain Region. I am a church starter who is in the middle of a cafe project here at the Oak Ridge United Church called the Poor and Needy Cafe. And I'm also a supply minister at the Wilson Heights United Church. I want to take a moment to thank the Coast Salish, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people for allowing us to be here on their unceded territories. For generations, they have cared for this land, and we promise to do the same alongside of them, and we seek for a spirit of reconciliation now and forever.
The psalmist writes, "The word is a lamp for my feet and a light for my path." As we have shared the Christ candle and flame throughout these past days as a region, we continue to light this Christ candle to remind us that Christ meets us in this place. And the flame has shone in our gathering and continues to shine as we worship and remember this day. Over the past couple of days, we have referenced, although virtual, the bringing together of people from all parts of the region. It has been our hope to feel and to be one body together. Although the potential in such a gathering, as it is to feel fragmented. We hope that we have also gathered these many fragments into one through wise words that have been shared, through technology that astounds us often and confounds us, through apps, through various means we have gathered. We have known the fire and the pressure cooker that is adaptive change, adaptive and efficient change. And we have also known moments of deep reflection, abundant time to reflect on our purpose and what is important to us at this time, and to also think clearly and thoroughly about who should be at our table. Hopefully, recognizing our common work together and witness, we've seen faithfulness and hope. I pray that you have had adequate notice to gather something together for this time, whether it be bread and wine or juice, whether it be crackers or muffins or whatever food you have, whatever ordinary food you have, to this moment of worship and blessing with us. And I want to emphasize that the power of the invitation to bring whatever you have to this intentional time is just that. Of all the variety of words and gestures we share across the diversity of our church and all of our liturgies, during communion, one of the most powerful parts of this remembering for me is when somehow we declare that gathered in Christ's presence, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. That when Christ meets us in this place, in the taken, broken, blessed, and received, Christ unites us with one another across whatever social distance we find ourselves. And I invite you to spend a few moments to listen to Stephen reflect for us on the importance of bread and what he has learned and discovered about this ordinary sustenance that has become extraordinary.
When I was growing up, whenever my mom or grandmother made bread, it was a special time. The smell would tantalize me for hours. Me and my cousins, we'd circle around like vultures, constantly asking to have some, and we would have eaten it straight hot out of the oven, even though all the recipes and my mother said, let it rest, let it cool, it's better after a few hours. Honestly, who has that much self-control? A few years ago, the tables turned, and I now find myself the baker. And actually being the one baking the bread is a totally different experience. Bread has the ability to bring you into its own time. Most of my life can feel like rushing and meeting deadlines, but bread likes to take it slow. It's on its own timeline. So a lot of bread making is just waiting for the little microorganisms to do their thing. Sadly, with the advent of laboratory commercial yeasts, the process that should have taken well over a day or longer, depending on the kind of bread and the strength of your family's starter, is now finished in mass commercial productions in just a couple of hours. But ancient baking processes, they're different. The way people have made bread for the last several thousand years is much slower and far more connected to the surrounding world. And so, in this way of baking, like the kind that I practice, there is much waiting. Waiting in anticipation of the next step in the process. And even though this process of making bread is ancient, every time I make a loaf, it feels unique. The environment changes, and so therefore the bread changes too. The way you handle the dough changes, and so the bread does too. And even if you've done it 100 times, or now like me, hundreds of times, you never know what's going to happen next. And I love that, because that's what following Jesus and being a disciple feels like to me. A lot of waiting, and you never really know what's going to happen next. Sometimes I encounter people that assume this religious way of life would become stale. That doing the same thing every week is just rote repetition, and that no one's really serious about their faith. And in some contexts, that's pretty true. There are some pretty lifeless situations in our churches. But instead, our faith can be like bread. Each week, day, year, each loaf, different. Because the circumstances of life are always changing. And in faith, like life, the seasons and liturgies, like the surrounding context for making bread, it invites us to slow down and to set aside time. In serving our neighborhoods, in our worship services, in the saying of prayers, in being in community, time, presence. And with bread and discipleship, it's a partnership, and a really lopsided partnership at that. With bread, you partner with a wild starter, also known as a SCOBY, or a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. In the world of fermentation, whether wine, cheese, or bread, it's really all the same. The process is dependent on these little microorganisms. And in the case of bread, the yeast breaks down the carbohydrates in the flour and sugar, and in that process, it releases gas or air. Gluten, a protein that you develop by handling the dough and stretching the dough, it allows the dough to become elastic as well as stretchable, and capturing the exhalation of all of the gases that the little yeasts are making. It's the very breath of the yeasts. And that's what causes your bread to rise. So if you don't have yeast, you can't have bread. Without the leaven, which fills the bread with life, it will not rise. In the same way, we need the Spirit of God, or nothing rises. We could build up the glutinous structure of liturgies, buildings, sermons, and workshops, but we need her breath to fill us, making us rise. Our work as the people of God, our liturgies, buildings, sermons, and workshops, they need God's Spirit. Precisely because without that power that raised Christ from the dead, all of our work falls flat. And so the love and power of God working in us can do infinitely more than any of us can imagine. And with that Holy Spirit, that living breath, we rise. And we, our very selves, can be bread for the journey for others.
From the beginning, followers of Christ have broken bread together, gathered at tables, fancy and simple, sharing wafers or entire meals. In this era of pandemic and separation, we continue to gather carefully together and virtually, sitting in our homes with our own supplies, but linked together by the bits and the bytes and the cables. This meal we share is hosted by the God who meets us where we are. Let us break bread together.
May God be with us.
God is with us.
Let us open them to God and to one another. Let us give thanks to God. It is right to give thanks and praise.
Holy One, you speak creation into being. We give thanks for all that you have made, for the waters from which life sprang forth, for the wind that fills our lungs, for the food that fills our bellies, for the fellow creature with whom we share the world, for the ordinary, for the extraordinary. We sing songs of praise and thanksgiving. Let us sing together now.
God, you call us to live in you, and you choose to share our lives. And so we pour out our fears and anxieties. We scream our laments. We dare to share our dreams and visions, trusting that you hear our prayers, trusting that in love you hold them and answer them.
God, you meet us where we are, be that in our churches or our struggling communities, in the forest or in our living rooms. You speak to us constantly through many voices. You remind us over and over again that even when we are distant from each other, we are not alone. We thank you for all those voices that have shared your love and promise over the past days. Prophets and pastors, leaders, questioners, siblings filled with your spirit, all those who remind us of who you are and re-invite us to live within the world you have made.
Through your peace and presence, you called each of us in wisdom and in faith and with courage to answer your call to the way of love and justice.
You asked only that we do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with you.
When broken by grief or tempted to greed, when consumed by pain or loneliness, or frozen from unexpected hate or violence, we have resorted to doubt. We have looked to other means for our sustenance, and yet we hear reminders of your deep, abiding presence.
In the signs and wonders that Christ performed, in the teaching he gave, he revealed your deepest desire, welcoming us to your table. We remember stories of bread broken and shared, stories of being gathered together, enemy and friend around table, stories of unlikely guests revealing the face of the sacred.
And so it was on the night of both celebration and betrayal that Jesus took the bread left over on the table and blessed it and broke it, reminding his followers that it is in the breaking that we become whole, in losing our lives that we find them, in serving that we are served. As the grain scattered becomes one in the loaf, when we eat this bread, we become one with one another. I want to invite you in your own individual homes to take an opportunity now to break your bread.
Then Christ took the cup on the table, poured it and shared it, remembering with them the life-giving breath, even now pounding a rhythm through our veins, the breath of life from whence we come, the breath that precedes and follows all that we can see. As the grapes find new life in the vine, when we drink this cup, we become at one with the source of life itself. I would invite you to pour out this love. I would invite you to join us in blessing this meal with Christ present. Let us pray. Holy Spirit, you blow through closed doors and into the places where we are. You meet us in our homes and fill us with hope. You light the fire of transformation in our hearts. As we pause to eat and drink this day, make us, while separate, unified in heart and hope. In this bread and in this cup, we meet Christ. In this meal of faith and transformation, may we feel the fire and wind of your realm. And once we have eaten, may we be unified in the common quest to share the dreams you have given us, willing to offer what we have, so that those dreams and visions take shape in your name in our world. Amen.
Amen.
Jesus Christ, the bread of life.
Jesus Christ, the cup of blessing.
Come, let us feast. Having feasted at Christ's table, let us pray.
We have broken the bread, we have poured the drink, we have shared a meal together. Even while we remain physically separated, we have been united. May this meal we share with each other and with the whole Christian family across the centuries and miles change who we are. May it feed the fire in our bellies. May it strengthen us when the storms blow through. And now, as we continue to live as people who have had the Holy Spirit breathed onto and into us, may we love and serve God, our neighbor, and ourselves, so that the kingdom of love is made real in our lives. Amen.
Bread of life, feed my soul, as the presence of the Spirit makes me whole. Oh, bread of life, fill my heart with the grace and mercy you impart. I have heard your voice calling, come my friend and share in the feast that is laid out for you, to show how much I care. Bread of life, help me live a life as pure and true as Jesus did. Bread of life, help me see the boundless love of Christ in you and me. I have heard your voice calling, come my friend and share as the feast that is laid out for you, to show how much I care. Bread of life, feed my soul, as the presence of the Spirit makes me whole. Bread of life, fill my heart with the grace and mercy you impart.
As we rise from this table and our time together, let us pray a prayer for the journey and each other. God of the way, you are the road we travel and the sign we follow. You are bread for the journey and the wine of arrival. Guide us as we follow in your way, holding on to each other, reaching out to your beloved world. And when we stray, seek us out and find us. Set our feet on the path again and lead us safely home. In the name of Jesus, our companion, we pray. Amen.
Blessings, my beloved. Go in peace. Go in love until we see each other again. Bye for now.